By now, I'm sure you've heard about the Progressive Bitcoiners partnership with Sun Exchange, the solar cell leasing platform that is bringing solar power to businesses and communities in South Africa. It turns out signing up is incredibly easy, and having recently done so, I was excited to see that I could help fund their new project, which is providing solar energy to Group Constantia, South Africa's oldest winery. Why would a winery do this? Well, it's simple: to maintain their commitment to conservation while meeting the unique energy demands of a vineyard. With Sun Exchange, you can easily earn Bitcoin and make a positive impact on the planet. With their new partnership, I'm hoping maybe we can earn bottles of wine back instead. But in the meantime, I'll take some sats. And lucky for you, Progressive Bitcoiner listeners, get a free solar cell with their first purchase at thesunexchange.com/Progressive Bitcoiner.
Jeff Booth talks about kind of just building this other system on the side while, the old system sort of exists and people kind of just bridge over gradually. But I do think I'm certainly hopeful that it's possible that we can reach more people and explain this sort of thing to them. But I do think it's exceedingly important that we do so in ways that are kind and inviting and empathetic, and it just all kind of boils down to just don't be a dick about it, and just paint something for people to describe the world that we as Bitcoiners want to build and want to live in and want to create, and sort of show people why that would be a better world to live in than the one we currently do, such that it incentivizes them and encourages them and gives them something to hope for. Because I think Bitcoin is ultimately, like I said earlier, I think it's about hope and optimism for being able to course correct some of the paths that we're on. So you got to lead with that, I think.
Welcome to the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast, where we explore the intersection of Bitcoin and progressive issues. I'm your host, Mark Stefani. My guest today is Logan Bolinger. Logan is an attorney by day and prolific tweet thread creator by night. He's been a fresh and insightful addition to Bitcoin commentary, sharing his perspectives as a former Bernie Sanders supporter turned Bitcoiner. He is the creator of Think Bitcoin, a newsletter providing Logan's thoughtful analysis of the space as well as additional curated Bitcoin content. Please enjoy this episode with Logan Bolinger. Well, Logan Bolinger, welcome to the Progressive Bitcoiner podcast. I'm grateful to have you here.
Thanks, Mark. I'm really excited to be here. Big fan of your show. I think you're doing a great service to the space. So excited for our conversation.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Before we get into your bio, you're a new dad. Is that right?
I am. That is right. Yeah, I have my wife and I, we have a 4-month-old. She's just over 4 months old. So it's within the realm of possibility that you might hear some her chiming in a little bit in the background. But she's a Bitcoiner, I can assure you. So
absolutely. And how is sleeping going?
There's a lot to be desired on that front. We're muscling through it. I'll say that. It's getting better though. It's improving. She's doing well.
I'm dealing with my own stress right now. My 4.5-year-old, we were out hiking up north and she face planted into a rock, and so she's got a gash on her forehead that required stitches. And
oh no,
when you face your child's first big medical trauma where you're holding her down to get stitches, that's traumatic. And very traumatic.
I can imagine. Yeah,
but speaking with older, seasoned parents, recognize it's just the beginning. So this too shall pass.
Right.
But you wrote a letter to your daughter about Bitcoin. Why did you do that?
That's a good question. I did that because the way that I view Bitcoin, I think we're on the cusp of kind of a big paradigm shift, just kind of globally, economically, socially, culturally. I think that is something that intuitively most people, I think, sense and feel that we're kind of coming to maybe the end of something. It's kind of hard to put your finger on what that is. And I think Bitcoin is going to play an important role in whatever sort of emergent reality comes out on the other side. And what I'm hopeful for is that it's a better world because of Bitcoin on the other side of this sort of transitional phase that I think we're in. And, I wanted to just sort of talk about that to my daughter and sort of give her my thoughts. And so she knows that this is something that I'm working towards, that I think everybody who is working in Bitcoin is ultimately at root an optimistic, hopeful person, despite sometimes I think we get mischaracterized as sort of doom and gloom folks who are wishing for the collapse of everything so that we can, have some kind of citadel on the other side where we keep everybody out. And I don't like that at all. And I kind of think that at heart, a lot of us in the Bitcoin space are actually just optimistic, hopeful folks who want to build a better future for posterity, for our kids, for our grandkids. And so I wanted my daughter to know that that's why I'm doing all of this. And that's what Bitcoin is about to me, is so that we can have a better world for your kids, for my kids. And I also think that Bitcoin there's kind of an honesty about the way that it works, structurally, proof of work, you can't really fake that. It's the opposite of kind of the fiat system where there's a lot of manipulation, a lot of shenanigans, the whole like get something for nothing type of dynamic in the existing system. And so I think we can learn things from Bitcoin and apply it to life, valuable lessons. And so I was trying to get some of that across to her as well. And hopefully she reads it someday. And hopefully, the years progress, we're moving more towards a world where Bitcoin is helping more people and creating a better environment for her and for everybody. And that would make me very happy.
May I read a segment from it?
Sure.
Be a part of this hope, cultivate it, advance it, work to keep it alive. When you stumble upon an idea like Bitcoin that can truly transform the world and move it forward, fight relentlessly on its behalf, because an idea with such power will be staunchly resisted by those who benefit most from the status quo, however unsustainable and destructive that status quo may be. As Oscar Wilde said, an idea that is not dangerous is unworthy of being called an idea at all. Clearly, you have a great deal of conviction, and I think it's the point in which we can try to better understand where that conviction came from. What is your Bitcoin story, Logan?
The first time that I encountered Bitcoin was in 2017. I was in law school at the time, and I just very happenstance, I listened to, I think it was a Tim Ferriss podcast with Nick Szabo, and it's about cryptocurrency. I had absolutely no idea what it was. It was quite a lengthy podcast, and it was riveting to me, and I found myself wanting to learn more. It was a totally foreign area. And so I got a book the only Bitcoin book that was available at the time, or at least that I could find, was a book by Nathaniel Popper. I think it was called Digital Gold. I don't think Saifedean's book was out. I don't think Jan Pritzker's Inventing Bitcoin was out, or Nick Batia or anything like that. So I read most of that book, but as I think from your educational background in medicine, law school gets busy, things get hectic, things get kind of lost in the shuffle, and so I didn't go fully down the rabbit hole in 2017. I got some Bitcoin, and I started to engage a little bit, but it didn't stick with me at that time. I didn't sort of get all of the story of Bitcoin, and I just got kind of distracted. I was just trying to get done with law school and get a job, and so I was in it from 2017, kind of into 2018. I got out near the top. Actually, I kind of sort of thought I was a genius at the time, which turned out to be the opposite. But so you, as I see all the time, people saying Bitcoin will humble you. I think that's true, and I was certainly humbled. And so I kind of followed the space a little bit from a short distance for the next year and a half or so. I actually took a securities regulation class in my third year of law school, and we talked about we went deep into the Howey test. We talked about Bitcoin and Ethereum, and it's pretty interesting from that perspective. And so it's interesting having kind of that grounding now as these conversations persist and continue to go on. And but it wasn't really until March, April, May of 2020 when it kind of hit me again, the Bitcoin, when I started to get back into it. And that was just because I've been somebody who's relatively pretty engaged in sort of personal finance and being smart with your money, and that sort of more traditional, I don't want to say full blown like FIRE space, the financial independence, retire early stuff, but just kind of adjacent to that world of just trying to be smart and sort of thinking, oh, the markets go up. But it was in March, April, May of 2020 when there were so many unknowns because of COVID. And there were different shutdowns and lockdowns, and the restaurants were mostly closed, and we were all doing takeout, and everything was really weird, and we just didn't really know what what the world was going to look like in 8 months. But nevertheless, markets just started going parabolic, and that was, even as somebody who had been pretty conditioned to believe that markets always go up no matter what. And obviously, I'm not an idiot. I know that the stock market is not the economy and it's forward looking and all that stuff. But it was still, it didn't pass the smell test to me, I guess. And I was a non-expert, obviously, but it didn't seem like that we should be having a parabolic move in the stock market in April, May of 2020, when we didn't have vaccines, we didn't have any idea of like what different variants would look like. And so I started to dig a little deeper, and that's kind of when I started to get into monetary policy, and I was getting back into Bitcoin at that time, because the people who were talking about monetary policy the most at that time were Bitcoin folks. And I sort of found some of them online, and I had a long commute to work. I still have a pretty long commute to work, so I listened to a lot of podcasts like yours, Mark, and others. And I remember listening to Jeff Booth's 10-part series on Robert Brelo's podcast, and I read Jeff's book, and you just had Jeff on recently, and that was a great episode. And he was very influential to me, especially in the beginning. It kind of helped me make sense of what was happening and the different forces at play. And from there, I just dove all the way down into the rabbit hole, and it's been the most intellectually exhilarating journey I've ever been on. And I'm saying this as somebody who genuinely loves being in school and loves reading and learning stuff. And so, but notwithstanding sort of all the other intellectual adventures I feel like I've been on, Bitcoin continues to reveal new things and be fascinating to me. And I started writing about it, and just getting more involved and meeting people in the space, and kind of just becoming part of the community. And I think trying to advance this technology forward and help more people kind of come on board and learn about it and learn the ways in which it can, create a better world. And here we are. And now I write a newsletter, and I'm on this show, and I try to do as much as I can.
Another thing that you wrote to your daughter was, Bitcoin does not belong to an ideology or political party. Neither should your mind. Was there a point on your journey here where you pushed back within your own mind about what you were learning, or were you kind of open to these new ideas from the beginning? You studied in the belly of the beast in the University of Chicago. You had to have had some tangential indoctrination at some point.
Yeah. So that's such a good question. I think one of the most compelling and kind of beautiful things about Bitcoin is the way that it sort of forces you to reflect upon a lot of your assumptions and sort of stress test them and really ruthlessly examine them. I think as somebody who's spent a lot of time studying in kind of a liberal arts environment, the whole Socratic, the unexamined life isn't worth living sort of thing. Everybody hears that, and everybody thinks that they're living an unexamined life. And then we all walk around and think that, oh yeah, I'm a curious, inquisitive, person who's objectively examining things, but you're really not. And I think Bitcoin really just forces you to reflect on that. It forced me to reflect on that. There was no really one instance for me that there wasn't really one aha moment. It was cumulative. I went from being a pretty staunch Bernie Sanders supporter, honestly, to kind of starting to question whether the solutions being proposed by folks like Bernie, whether they were actually addressing what I was coming to see as the actual problem that was causing all of the symptoms that I was hoping for somebody like Bernie to address. And as cliche and totally hackneyed and almost tired at this point as the Matrix sort of memes are, there's certainly some truth to that, where you're kind of just gradually waking up and saying, oh, well, maybe a lot of the things that I thought about that were wrong were, maybe I was sort of jumping on that bandwagon because I was concerned more with my political tribe and what they thought. And that was maybe a shortcut to thinking in some ways. It was me kind of cutting the corners and just saying, who's the group of people that I feel like I identify the most with, and what do they think? And what do they think the problem is? And okay, let's go that route. And I think Bitcoin is appealing to people kind of want to punch it into different ideologies, but it's sort of ultimately, it kind of resists that. There are valuable things about Bitcoin for people of a diversity of ideologies. So I find that kind of endlessly interesting. But yeah, to answer your question, there was no kind of specific point where I just kind of said, okay, well, now it's all different. It was just cumulative, and it's just and I just feel like I was just almost like opening up layer by layer, and I felt like I was unlearning things that that I didn't really realize that I had been sort of inculcated with over the years. And you sort of do almost like an autopsy of your own influences, and you kind of examine all those, and I try to still be as critical as possible of even sort of Bitcoin influences that kind of come into my life. But I one of the, like, we were talking earlier about, the letter to my daughter about the different values that I think Bitcoin stands for, or at least, encourages in people. And I do think open-mindedness and curiosity and sort of self-reflection are some of those things. And I think I've become more more self-reflective and more critical because of Bitcoin, because of going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole.
I want to read one more thing that you've written, and this was from a piece that you wrote for Bitcoin Magazine entitled From Bernie to Bitcoin. You state, individuals and political parties can be compromised. Commitment can waver or halt. Ideas can ossify, devolve, or fail to appropriately meet changing facts. Errors can and will be made. Special interests can prove more insidious and insurmountable than originally anticipated or promised. And more bleakly, power can, and often does, corrupt. Candidates can and do lie, which is all to say individuals are single points of failure. Trusting that none of the aforementioned phenomena will occur is, as I have indubitably learned, naive. So what you're describing here, in my opinion, is simply human fallibility. You have a master's in English literature from the University of Chicago. What, if any, lessons have you taken from your myriad stories, books that you've read over the years that can be applied to this predicament of human fallibility that we seem to be faced with in our political system?
Fantastic question. This is a super interesting question. I think perhaps it might be more accurate to say that I didn't fully learn some of the lessons that I should have learned from a lot of the stories that I read and the work that I spent a lot of time studying. And now when you posed that question to me, the first thing that came to my mind was there's a Shakespeare quote, and I forget the play that it's in. We can look it up later, but it's that the strongest oaths are but straw to the fire and the blood, which is to say, basically that man, men, women, humans, we may have these lofty commitments that we make, or we may sort of have these lofty ideals that we purport to live by and abide by, and those are the sort of proverbial strongest oaths in the quote. But they're nothing but straw to the fire and the blood, which is sort of the inherently human, the emotion part and the sort of the different motivations that you can be infused by and moved by that you don't always know where they come from, and sort of they're not always morally aligned with who you think you are. People tend to be more, especially politicians, very short-term minded, short-term motivated. I would say dubiously incentivized in other ways as well. And there's also the other quote I was thinking about was, and one of the things I studied as well was film, and my wife sort of makes fun of me because I'm always talking about these old foreign films, and she's like, you're the only person who cares about this. But anyways, there's this famous French film called The Rules of the Game. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it in French, but it's a Jean Renoir movie. I think it's from the 30s. But at the end of it, after sort of all everybody's lives kind of unravel and all the sort of lies and secrets and everything just comes apart, And Jean Renoir's character, he was acting in the film as well. He has this line where he says, I think it's sort of, in this world, the awful thing is that everyone has their reasons, and just kind of leaves it at that. And that is the awful thing about the world, is that everybody has their reasons. And I think sometimes, and that was kind of some of the things I was talking about in that article about trying to limit the surface area on which human error and shenanigans and kind of those types of motivations can become overly influential. That was just all kind of getting back to, it's really difficult to entrust humans, or to kind of trust humans to live in this and conduct policy in this perfectly moral way that you want them to, because they're going to mess it up. That is, thousands and thousands of years of human history and human nature, and the stories that we tell about it, I think is pretty compelling evidence that that's going to happen. So yeah, that was kind of my thinking there. And I probably didn't, I use that Shakespeare quote all the time, but I think it's one of those things sometimes you say, but you don't fully internalize it as much until you kind of see it.
Until you live it. Yes, everybody has their reason to be able to rationalize away moral hazard. If they've made their $1 million donation to such and such a philanthropy, then the results of their moral hazard somehow can be explained away.
Mm-hmm.
So you wrote Bernie to Bitcoin, a 2-part article, and the articles describe this journey that you go on from being a Bernie supporter, what he stands for, and really the integrity that you see in this individual as a politician, knowing that he is unique in that sense. But even with that realization, you come to sense that that is not enough. The individual with that integrity, whether that's Bernie or Obama or an AOC, is not enough when you're in this system that incentivizes bad behaviors. So you've described Bitcoin as a separate system. I first want to ask you, do you think there is a way that we can talk to other individuals about that very situation, about talking that the solution may not be in a new elected official, may not be a new law or regulation, rather we need a new system entirely? It's a concept that is so foreign because I think our generation has not lived through a system change. And so that idea is really hard to grasp. Do you think there's a way of bridging that gap?
I'm certainly hopeful that there is a way to bridge that gap. I think you're correct. It's certainly correct that nobody in our general age cohort has gone through a major monetary system paradigm shift. I think I think it's important for, if we're going to bridge that gap and sort of break this down to more people and educate more folks and explain why Bitcoin is potentially a third way that most folks haven't thought about. I think the way that we communicate is important, and obviously the way that Bitcoiners communicate has become kind of a hot topic of late. And I do think it's worth discussing that, because I think you're not going to bring people on board by painting this. You don't want to sort of paint this kind of dystopian hellscape that is imminent, in a year or two, if we all don't sort of sell all our possessions and buy Bitcoin tomorrow. That I don't like the idea of, I think it's important to talk about the flaws of the current system and the consequences that potentially lie ahead if we persist in this path. But I think it's a more productive approach to, rather than describe the calamity that we want people to run from, if we describe or do more work in painting a picture of what we might run toward, which I think is a more powerful narrative. It's a pretty basic, simple, and I'm definitely not the first person who's suggested that we start framing it in that way. I think that's certainly more compelling for folks to say, hey, do you kind of feel like you're on a endless treadmill right now, trying to hold things together and stay above water, and you can't stop on the treadmill, or else really bad things happen, and sort of start from that point, just human to human. Well, how do you feel in this current environment? Like, let me, you might reflexively think that Bitcoin is this crazy magical internet money thing, but have you reflected about your current situation? I mean, how do you feel? And then kind of meeting people there, and sort of guiding them down this path. Well, maybe this might be why some of this stuff is happening. And there's this other sort of thing that we're trying to build on concurrently. Jeff Booth talks about kind of just building this other system on the side while the old system sort of exists, and people kind of just bridge over gradually. But I do think, I'm certainly hopeful that it's possible that we can reach more people and explain this sort of thing to them. But I do think it's exceedingly important that we do so in ways that are kind and inviting and empathetic, and it just all kind of boils down to just, don't be a dick about it, and just paint something for people to describe the world that we as Bitcoiners want to build and want to live in and want to create, and sort of show people why that would be a better world to live in than the one we currently do, such that it incentivizes them and encourages them, and gives them something to hope for. Because I think Bitcoin is ultimately, like I said earlier, I think it's about hope and optimism for being able to course correct some of the paths that we're on. So you got to lead with that, I think.
You've described it as a political system invites us to place more and more trust in individuals to solve more and more problems in an environment more and more hostile to problem solving of any kind. This trust that you describe, you compare the trust of the current system to the trust needed in Bitcoin, and perhaps offloading some of that to the network. Can you tell us a little bit more how you contrast those two systems as it relates to trust?
Yeah, so I think a good example of the problems with the current system is just take a look at every month the way we sort of anticipate with bated breath every word that comes out of Jerome Powell's mouth. The Fed governors. I mean, it's just a word by word sort of weird. It's just really bizarre ritual at this point that we're doing, and the entire global economy hinges on what 7 unelected people sitting in a room. And I don't know if you ever read the book Lords of Easy Money I think it's by Chris, but and the rooms that they seem to be sitting in per that book, they're not even really talking to each other that much, and they're just alone looking at their models, which sounds kind of depressing and sad, but that's and we await their sort of declarations about what the global economy is going to look like, and or how much money is there going to be, and what's the cost of that money going to be, and the ripple effects of that ripple throughout the entire world down into sort of emerging markets and other countries that are just not nearly as wealthy as we are, and are sort of bearing the brunt and the consequences of this. And I think it seems to me that we've just gotten so far away from any ability to be able to address actual system problems, because both sides are now have just placed the blame on the other side politically, which of course invites. So when the division that you've created is basically not us versus problems that we need to solve, but us versus like the other political party, because if they get in power, then it's going to be hell on earth. So but for us, then your pitch to voters becomes more of like, just trust us. Like, you have to trust us because you can't trust them. They will kill us all. And so I think we've sort of almost created this situation where every sort of political pitch at this point is just, well, I'm not that person, so you can trust me to do this. And I think Bitcoin offers a way to get some distance from that. I mean, I think like Jeff Booth and others, I think when you have misinformation at the monetary level, that's obviously going to trickle out, and there's not a whole lot of incentive for individual politicians always to make decisions that are, I think, in the best interests of people other than kind of a small group of folks who exercise the most control. And so I think, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question well, but I think Bitcoin gives us sort of this third way to look at problem solving that is less trust me, I will solve this problem, and more sort of, oh, well, you actually can't solve this problem, but if we, implement or adopt or use this other sort of monetary system, then I don't actually need to worry about trusting you to steward it or to maintain it or to make correct decisions about it, because despite your entreaties to me about how you're going to do that, I don't actually, I'm not, I don't want to bet my house on the fact that you're going to do that. And so why don't I just kind of obviate the necessity of trusting you by, sort of using something like Bitcoin?
Describe for us the example that you use in the comparison between how government treats money and how big pharma treats health, and inevitably getting similar results.
Well, I think in both of those situations, it's about treating symptoms as opposed to treating the root causes of problems. And it's sort of a painkiller philosophy. Whereas instead of, and, obviously, Mark, you can speak to this considerably more than I can, as a physician. But, it's this idea of, instead of, I think that sort of in more Eastern medicine, it's more of, let's move through the pain and not sort of, figure out the root cause of the pain so we can address that so we don't constantly have recurrence, or exacerbation of symptoms. But I think in America, I mean, there's a lot of pharmacological intervention in America. I think we tend to, and just to clarify, I am 100% a fan of medicine, and using medicine. And when I need to take medicine, I do that. But I think it's worth, taking a holistic look at, if you're sick, or you're not feeling energized, or you're feeling a little down or something like that. I think it's worth taking a look holistically at your life and trying to figure out environmentally and sort of at the sort of base layer of your existence, what are all the inputs that are going in that are making you feel that way? And how do we address those at kind of the most fundamental level versus just giving you a pill or something and saying, well, just here you go. We'll see you in a month. And, you'll probably just that doesn't really address the problem. You just
Treating symptoms and treating more symptoms.
Exactly.
And symptoms of the symptoms.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you kind of, potentially have a cascading effect, or you have some side effects, and then it creates other symptoms. And it's kind of can go on sort of infinitely. And I think the way that we've been conducting monetary policy in this country and elsewhere, certainly in Europe as well, is very much in kind of this painkiller way of, well, let's just, from a very sort of short-term perspective, let's just like eliminate all discomfort at all times. Like we cannot allow there to be any pain whatsoever. And let's just kind of put Band-Aids on everything. Sure, the system itself may be crumbling and there may be existential issues with it, but let's not worry about that. Let's just kind of, wrap it up with an ace bandage and send somebody on their way. And I think, if you do that enough, you're just going to create increasingly intractable problems, more severe problems, more unsolvable problems. And I think eventually the cure, if you kind of let this go long enough, the cure itself is going to be painful at that point. So I think it's just both of those, the monetary policy and the big pharma thing. It's just about they're similar in the sense that it's very short-term minded and just treating symptoms and not root causes of problems.
And it all becomes, in what we call in medicine, comorbid conditions. So somebody's got multiple different chronic diseases, such as heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, chronic kidney disease, et cetera, that have been addressed with medications, procedures, dialysis, et cetera, over time. That, yes, while have provided some relief for the person, have not addressed root causes. Root causes being that individual is probably living in an urban area with food deserts, did not have appropriate access to quality food, did not have appropriate access to medical care, did not have appropriate access to technologies that can provide healthier incentives, et cetera. And in turn, they're left with a system that kicks the can further down the road, having to see me every other month to put Band-Aids on you so that you can come back to the hospital in a few more months with the exact same thing. But we've prolonged your life. And that's what we look at. We don't look at the quality of life nearly as much as we should, as what the what is the quality of our economy? And I think that is perhaps a crux of the matter, that the GDP does not get to equality. It's very much a quantity measure. And clearly, the quality of our lives seems to be impaired when what we measure is not indicative nor translates into the quality of our lives.
Precisely, yeah. And I think as a physician, I think you would probably say, if you could, if there was a way for you to effectively address some of those, the root causes of things that you were talking about, some of those really difficult things from a medical perspective, you would, if that was something that you could easily sort of get to and fix, like things like food deserts and that sort of thing. That would be the
I am, my friend. I starting a new business, and we're launching soon to address these very things, lifestyle factors, which are the majority of what defines somebody's health. And so, in addition, it would be my dream someday to use Bitcoin miners to heat greenhouses so that I can have food produced here in the great northern tundra year round, so that blueberries and et cetera do not need to be shipped from South America all the way up to North America to have in the winter. And so we can have fresh produce that can be cultivated by people who need it the most, and they've got free food, they've got employment, and us hibernating up here in the winter get some delicious produce when we wouldn't otherwise been able to do so. So that's my dream.
I love that so much, Mark, and it's like a beautiful example of why I love this space so much. Is people like yourself, ideas and ventures like that sort of you are addressing root problems. You're using Bitcoin, the whole the values and the things that we learn from Bitcoin. You take those and you can kind of apply those to other fields, and it seems like Bitcoin is constantly. I mean, your episode with Margot was good with this too. Is Bitcoin just offers all of these unique ways to address problems that I just don't. It's almost like it's an unlock. It breaks log jams and just offers these totally out of the box unique ways to address things that maybe we didn't have as easily accessible tools or methodologies to address them as effectively before or without Bitcoin. So that's really cool, Mark. Congrats, and I hope we hear a lot more about that on subsequent shows.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm curious to get some technical analysis from you, not TA, from an investment standpoint, but from an expertise standpoint. So you've had courses in securities law and obviously property and so forth. So I wanted to ask you those 2 points, and you can nerd out on us for us, please. Give us a lowdown. Securities, it's a hot topic right now. I haven't delved into the details of what's going on with Coinbase quite yet, but where do you come down on all these other thousands of tokens and whether or not they're unregistered securities? How should we see that as Bitcoiners? How should we see that as lay people?
So it's a great question. I'll preface by saying certainly not legal advice, but I think there are 2 different ways to look at it. I think, and hopefully this is helpful. I think you can look at it through the existing securities law regime, which is the Howley test that everybody talks about, and the Securities Act and the Securities Exchange Act, and these are from the 30s. These are sort of FDR stuff. And then what I think is being argued by the bill that was proposed by Cynthia Lummis, Senator Lummis, Senator Gillibrand, and which I think is in line with what the folks who are working in, I guess we'd call it the Web3 universe, what they kind of want, which is basically just, I think they want to say, okay, we understand that there's this securities regime from the 30s that dates back, basically 100 years. But perhaps we should revisit that framework and ask, is that outdated? Is that helpful? Is that the whole purpose of these acts is to protect investors, encourage adequate disclosures? And are we doing a disservice to investors if we lump everything under this securities regime and sort of just do it all that way? And I think if you're looking at it from perspective 1, which is Howley tests, old school SEC stuff, I think it's pretty hard to argue that, I certainly don't want to get myself in trouble, but it's certainly hard to argue that anything other than Bitcoin is not a security. I think I've heard and read some arguments about Ethereum that are certainly not compelling. But I think Bitcoin is obviously not a security under Howie, and I think for 99.9% of other tokens, it's a really heavy lift to argue otherwise. I'm not saying it's impossible, and I'm sure that there are people who do. I don't do securities law anymore, so my field anymore. So I'm sure there are securities lawyers currently working on this who, I mean, I know that there are because my wife is also a lawyer and she does venture stuff, and we have these discussions. And so there are certainly arguments to be made. For me personally, though, my personal opinion is I think Bitcoin is obviously not a security under the current securities law framework. And I think everything else is, you got to bring a strong argument. And with respect to some of the new frameworks, I mean, I think the Lummis-Gillibrand bill basically is trying to just kind of construct an entirely new way of looking at what is a security and asking that question. That's not constrained to this Howey test stuff from the 30s. That it seems like they want to sort of look to the future and say, okay, does this old stuff still serve us? Is it still serving the purpose that it was supposed to serve for investors in the 30s? And maybe that gets passed, maybe it doesn't. I don't think nothing's getting passed before midterms, I don't think, but we'll see. It seems like I get into these arguments sometimes on Twitter with folks about, they'll be bemoaning the securities laws, and you have to remind people, the SEC, I mean, Congress can just write another securities law if they want. I mean, and then that's all they have to do. They write another law, and then boom, we have another whole other framework, and that could happen. It seems like that probably will happen at some point. So, I think we're dealing with the 1930s stuff now, but I expect we'll probably get a whole new framework that we can all fight about at some point. Don't know when that's going to be, but probably within the next few years. So we'll see.
There'll be some sacrificial lambs, and
yeah,
others will have lobbying dollars to fit the bill.
Yeah, and I will say, I do think, with some of the Coinbase stuff that's going on now, I think all sides can agree. I think even Bitcoiners will agree that the SEC. It's odd to me when I see Bitcoiners basically cheerleading Gary Gensler in some ways, who I don't necessarily think is a friend categorically necessarily to all of us. And I think Bitcoiners should still be able to recognize when the SEC is acting in ways that seem a little underhanded, like these sort of, using these enforcement actions to try to sneak in sort of securities determinations. You can sort of agree with their assessments on whether certain things are securities and still simultaneously disagree with the way that they're approaching it. And there's certainly an argument to be had that some of these things don't even fall within their jurisdictional purview anyway, and that they shouldn't be. That this is a CFTC thing. But so I think some of the stuff they're trying to sneak into the Coinbase action is not optimal, and I think that's going to get fought pretty hard. Seems like it's being fought pretty hard by the Coinbase folks as we speak.
So just a couple more questions for you before we round out the hour. You mentioned that your wife is an attorney as well, and she works within the venture capital world. What has been the dinner conversations about the 2017 ICOs, the current VC funding of a lot of these token projects? How does she view that? What are her perspectives?
I want to be careful. She's much smarter than me on some of that stuff for sure, and she has a very ground level view of what goes on. Suffice to say, our dinner conversations we talk about this stuff pretty much constantly. I would say ad nauseum. It's candidly probably a good thing that our daughter is only 4 months old and doesn't have to sort of listen to this and comprehend it and be annoyed by it already. But yeah, it's something we discuss a lot. I think. I mean, she's certainly. My wife is definitely a Bitcoiner. At heart, she has a lot of conviction in Bitcoin, and we're totally aligned on that. We both think that there are lots of exciting things going on that are going to reshape the future and how we do things. I personally think that Bitcoin is the most exciting thing that is happening in the sort of that general space. I wouldn't say I wouldn't be comfortable saying that like no other thing other than Bitcoin will ever serve any use or be productive in any way, in any form, ever. Things that are currently in existence or may exist in the future. Because I think that type of categorical thinking, I just don't. I mean,
it's the same categorical thinking that no coiners have about Bitcoin.
Correct. Yes, and it never ends up being correct. So I try to, and like I said, I think Bitcoin teaches you to be open minded and curious, and so I think you've got to don't trust, verify everything with your research, and sort of bring your perceptual and intellectual skills and equipment to bear on these things, and make your own decisions. But yeah, I certainly don't want to put words in her mouth, so I'll just say we talk a lot about these things, and she loves Bitcoin. She's been a huge support to me and my Bitcoin journey, and I certainly would not be writing the newsletter and doing all this stuff without the support of my wife.
Well, thank you for your diplomatic response, Counsel.
Thank you.
I want to get your opinion. Actually, I'm going to sneak in one more question here. To me, I cannot get my head around. We'll use Ethereum as an example. The token itself, the fact that it goes up in price as it relates to the protocol itself, and listeners will have heard me refer to this as the Rattler dilemma. That if it's going to be used in a platform such as Ethereum, if you're going to use that token in that platform, I would argue that it should be cheap, and in the sense like an ATM fee should be cheap in order to use the platform that is Ethereum. But it's going up in value because it's being treated almost like a security. Would new security laws somehow settle that, where all of a sudden the way that you utilize Ethereum, the platform, is different than ETH, the security, and in effect it becomes almost like a stock? Am I over my skis here?
No, that's a super interesting question. I'm not sure. I certainly don't think that I don't want to be unfair to Senators Lummis and Gillibrand, but I don't think that there is anything in their bill, and I haven't sort of line by line combed through it, but I don't think that problem is going to be, or that the Rattler dilemma is going to be resolved legislatively by anything that's being proposed or discussed currently. So yeah, I'm not sure on that front. I would be I would not bet that is going to get solved by legislation written by people in Congress who are still very much, honestly, they're probably not thinking about it quite as deeply, Mark, as you just articulated that and formulated that. I think we should be cognizant of the fact that that these men and women in Congress are very much playing catch up on. And I think there's some admirable outreach being done, educational efforts at Bitcoin Policy Institute. Shout out to them. It's being done, but I don't think that they're fully in that deep maybe yet. I could be wrong, but perhaps they are. Maybe some of their staffers are, but I don't know.
All right, Logan, you know my last question. What gives you hope?
Oh yes, I love this question. So I have a lot of hope in Bitcoin, candidly, from because there are folks like you out here spending their time. There are a lot of folks like us spending their time doing basically side jobs, trying to educate others, and I'm really heartened by the fact that in addition to folks like you and the audience that you're intending to address, that there are also other podcasts addressing different audiences, and we can kind of agree on, at least at the base level, that Bitcoin is a good thing. And it gives me hope to see that there is something that that people with differing political inclinations and ideologies can kind of at least agree on to a certain extent. I think we live in an age where there's nobody agrees on anything, and so I think knowing that that Bitcoin is able to bring folks together, gives me frankly gives me hope that humans are still capable of cooperating and potentially putting certain other differences aside and to work towards the greater good, which would be the advancement of Bitcoin. So that gives me a lot of hope, and I just get really inspired seeing. Every day I see more really smart, really driven, really thoughtful people doing work in the space, writing in the space, making podcasts, and everybody seems to have this goal of making more people aware of Bitcoin and trying to build this future that'll be better than the reality that we're currently living in. And so I think that gives me hope, inspiration, makes me happy, makes me excited and fired up to do my small parts in this whole thing and write the things that I write. As I'm sure you feel sometimes, you don't always want to make the podcast or write the newsletter, or it's been a busy day at work, but then I think of everybody else who's doing it, and I think of the ultimate goal, and I think, no, this is this is like I wrote, I think, in the letter to my daughter. I mean, when you get a chance to work for something like this, you gotta really give it it's worth it. Give it everything that you have to advance it, because you're not going to regret the time you spent doing it.
And your writing is a testament to that. And so I lied. I want to read one more segment here from one of your pieces. I was a Bernie supporter because I wanted to address a litany of societal problems. I am now a Bitcoiner because I know that deca billionaires, dominant corporations, quote, late-stage capitalism, and Mark Zuckerberg, though certainly objectionable, are not the causes of these problems. They are symptoms of a broken money. Logan, your writing is exceptional. Your insight is as well. Please tell the listeners where they can find more of it through your newsletter.
Sure. Yeah, I write a free biweekly newsletter. It's called Think Bitcoin. It's through Substack, so I believe you can find it at thinkbitcoin.substack.com. I'm also on Twitter at the Y of Fi. That's the Y of FI. And check out the newsletter. Mark, I really appreciate this conversation. Like I said, this is one of my favorite podcasts. And so I think you're doing an amazing job, and I look forward to hearing more about some of your future endeavors that you're working on as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Logan. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark.
Hey, don't forget to visit sunexchange.com/progressive Bitcoiner to buy solar cells that will power the projects that inspire you. You'll earn monthly Bitcoin payments for 20 years from the clean energy your solar cells generate, and the organizations you power gain access to affordable, reliable, clean energy. With Sun Exchange, you can easily earn Bitcoin and make a positive impact on the planet. Progressive Bitcoiner listeners get a free solar cell with their first purchase, so get started at sunexchange.com/progressive Bitcoiner. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Progressive Bitcoiner. If you enjoyed the show, head on over to Apple Podcasts and please leave a review. And don't forget, we have a website, theprogressivebitcoiner.com, where we have a lot of great content on Bitcoin and progressive issues. Thanks again for tuning in.